One thing seemed clear to me from talking with the guys. Rapture made Bioshock. That statement seems simple enough, but for a game in the shooter genre, having a city so rich and alive it can tell its own story past the plot of a single game is something unique. Many Bioshock fans have taken the world of Rapture and created their own fanfiction. In fact, ever since the game was announced and Bioshock 2 was only a title, the internet was alive with speculation about what the plot would be. A lot of it was very in-depth. Having a history with the first Bioshock, both Jordan and Hoagie knew how valuable an asset they had in Rapture.
We believe that it's incredibly fertile. Hoagie and I were both on Bioshock 1. In fact, Hoagie was my level architect or level artist on the Fort Frolic level. And when we were working on that game, there were a lot of ideas that occurred to us that we could do, but that we didn't fit into the first game. And toward the end, when Bioshock 1 was about to ship, these conversations would just emerge about what we could do next. And we think that a city built out of such strong ideas is a place that has long-term kind of interest. And so from there, it seemed like the shift of perspective that Hoagie mentioned, that moving into the role of one of these sort of noble but rather persecuted Big Daddy figures was an interesting way to change your role in the ecology and thus change the type of story that we're telling around you. And of course, there are a lot of cool things that we thought that the player might like to see. New locations in Rapture that suggested themselves, but that didn't fit with the story of Bioshock 1. And here in Bioshock 2, we have an opportunity to bring those to life.
Yeah, I think also the space station utopia was really boring. But honestly, like Jordan and I talked about this like a while ago. Like, what do we do for the sequel? And without sort of any idea was out on the table at that point. And I think nobody has played Bioshock probably more than the developers who made it. And so I feel like in one respect we are a pretty good litmus test of whether it's still an interesting place or not. And I mean, at the beginning, like, I just was so psyched to actually think about new parts of the city of Rapture and continue working in the artistic style that we developed for the first game, and invent locations and stories and characters that still existed in Rapture. And if that doesn't bore us, and we're the people who've played it for thousands upon thousands of hours, then I think we have a pretty good perspective on how interesting that location really is.
While Rapture may be a fascinating place, this is a video game we're talking about after all, and the character you play is crucial to the success of the experience. In Bioshock 1, the player took on the role of a seemingly regular man, stranded in Rapture, but in Bioshock 2, you step into the shoes of the first Big Daddy. Big Daddies, in Bioshock 1, were probably the most feared opponent you could come upon, many wielding huge drills in one hand, and others carrying rivet guns that could take you down in moments.
One of the cool things about playing a Big Daddy is in Bioshock 1, you would defeat the Big Daddies, and then clunking to the ground would be this huge guy in an antique diving suit, and he'd have this big badass drill on his hand. And so you'd be like, man, that thing's better than this wrench I've got. I wish I could use that. And you couldn't. Well, in Bioshock 2, you actually begin with the drill. Furthermore, there was another type of Big Daddy called a Rosie, that when you would take her out, you would drop this massive industrial rivet gun on the ground. And there it was, this super ornate thing that it looks like a playable weapon, but it's like, oh, sorry, you're just a regular dude. You can't wield that thing. Well, in Bioshock 2, of course, all the Big Daddy weapons are accessible to you. And so the rivet gun is one of the early ranged weapons that you get.
Becoming a Big Daddy sounds like an awesome experience, but as I said, they were the thing that was most feared. Ask a veteran Bioshock player how he felt the first time he faced a Big Daddy, and I promise the tale will be harrowing. All this talk of badass weapons and becoming one of the most powerful elements in Rapture makes me ask, who do you fear now? The big sister, Jordan says back.
The player is a prototype, which kind of puts him in this position of being smarter and faster than the average Big Daddy. The idea is that the later models were sort of simplified and more kind of brute-like, and that the player was designed to be to take a different role, essentially. And that puts you in the place where other Big Daddies are a legitimate threat. It's like if in a single-player game you were this kind of unstoppable singular force. But if you were to face yourself, that would be a huge challenge. So the Big Daddies are still a very legitimate threat. Splicers in large groups. Splicers are the sort of degenerate drug addicts who have become addicted to this drug called Adam, and have been altering their DNA over and over again, and sort of causing them to fall apart but get more powerful at the same time. In large groups, those guys are still very much a threat to you. And then there are new splicers to come in Bioshock 2 that have managed to survive all of the time between the events of the first game and the second. And those guys, because they have managed to basically in a completely closed system be the ones, the top predators, they actually are a real threat to you. And then finally, on top of all of that, there is a brand new character who is sort of born of Rapture's tragic history, and who takes a place at the very top of the food chain. So in Bioshock 1, you would have these sort of dynamic and very consensual boss fights against the Big Daddy characters. Well, there's a character called the Big Sister.